Hi and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh and in this video we'll go through how to efficiently capture a HDRI for your visual effects. So I will say this is how I create HDRIs and isn't a you have to do it this way or won't work method. There are other ways, but this is how I make HDRIs efficiently for film and TV. First of all, I'll just go through the equipment I use for HDRIs. So I have a Canon 5D Mark II and this has been my workhorse camera for quite a long time. It's a great camera and I picked it up second hand. In fact, pretty much all my kit is second hand as it can be expensive to buy new. I know some of you are now probably saying, why not just use a 360 camera like a Theta or something similar? And yes, you can get a good looking panorama from it and use its bracketing for some low dynamic range. But the sensor is so small and you just don't get the image resolution. I think it's 2048 by 1024. You just don't get the resolution and detail you would from a DSLR. And don't forget that the data you get on set is needed by everyone, not just lighting. Comp or DMP may need to take a section of the HDRI for their work. And if you give them a nice big panorama shot properly, they will love you. I wouldn't suggest using a Theta, maybe for only reference, but if it's all you have, it's okay, something is better than nothing. I use a Sigma 8mm lens as this captures a 180-degree field of view and allows me to shoot a lot less images and complete the job much faster. On my tripod I use a Nodal Ninja. This allows me to set my camera position to the nodal point. The nodal point of a lens is where the point at which the light rays enter the lens and converge. This is marked on my lens with a gold strip that can be found approximately where the aperture of the lens is. Having your camera set at the nodal point means you'll get better stitching and reduced processing time. I also have a Macbeth chart for colour grading or match grading your HDRI to the footage. These are very useful to have in your HDRI as a chart is a solid foundation of colour which is recognised everywhere. But don't worry if you don't have one. I'll go through match grading your HDRI in another video. And finally, ND filters. These are very useful to reduce exposure if the area is very bright or you're doing something more specific. I don't usually use these for HDRIs, but I do keep them just in case. So you don't need to go out and buy all this equipment to HDRIs for your VFX. You can just use your normal camera on a tripod and still get really good results. You may get some stitching misalignments and you might have to take a lot of photos depending on your lens, as you'll need to overlap, but generally I doubt you would notice any stitching misalignments in your 3D scene, unless you're actually rendering a giant chrome ball. So let's talk about AEB, Auto Exposure Bracketing. This is a setting on most cameras and it allows you to create a series of images that can be set to change exposure for each image. At the top here you can see 12 images ranging from very underexposed to overexposed. And these are the image that we use to create our high dynamic range image by merging them together. And we'll do this for multiple angles so then we can stitch a panorama, creating the HD panorama or HDRI as we all know it. Now I'll just go through my basic camera settings that work for me. I'll set my image quality to RAW to get extra dynamic range in a RAW file. These can be quite big files, and if that's an issue you can just use JPEGs as we will be creating the dynamic range anyway. For white balance I'll set it to my Macbeth chart or a white card, but you can use pretty much anything around you that's white, or you can just eyeball it if you're a photography pro. My ISO, I'll set it to 100 or as low as I can get, so we don't want any grain in there. And I'll set my shutter speed to a neutral exposure depending on the time of day. So at the top, some of you may be wondering how I got 12 bracketed exposures on my Canon 5D. I'm currently using Magic Lantern firmware on my camera, and this basically unlocks all functionality of your camera, but it will void your warranty if you install it onto your camera. Magic Lantern really is a must-have, and it will give you way more functions than the Canon firmware can. But like I said again, it will void your warranty, so don't install it unless you're happy to have no warranty. So I use Magic Lantern mainly for its bracketed exposure function. I think Canon has like 3 or 4 brackets that you can do, but Magic Lantern will let you go up to 12 frames, which I think actually beats almost every camera, even the top of the line super expensive ones. I'll set my Magic Lantern settings to TV AE, which means it's aperture priority. So when I set my aperture to 8 or above, it never changes. And you really don't want to make HDRIs with aperture changes, as the depth of field will change and will either fail at processing or will just look really bad. You can set your frames to whatever you like. 12 will give me the best dynamic range, but will take longer and will drastically raise your shutter count on your camera. My EV increment is 1, but you can try out some other settings and see what you prefer. And my sequence is 0, which is my neutral exposure, minus, plus, minus, minus, plus, plus. And this will take bracket exposures from your neutral exposure, 0, then an underexposed image, then over, then 2 underexposed, and then 2 overexposed. And this will save time on large shutter adjustments. And I previously said that I would set my shutter speed to a neutral exposure, and that's what I do for a daytime or a morning HDRI. But taking a night HDRI, I would change my sequence to 0, plus, plus, plus. Then set my neutral exposure to a point where I can barely see the last bit of light. This setting then would increase the exposure over each bracket, only getting brighter and brighter. This saves me time as we can start from the darkest point and work towards the brighter images in the brackets. Now to planning our shoot. Here I have some diagrams of a camera on a tripod, top and side view. I've placed a protractor over the top so we can estimate our angles of our shoot. So I did say previously that you can pretty much use any camera or any lens just on a normal tripod to create a HDRI, and you can. You just may get some stitching misalignments, but your lens choice is very important. I'm going to go to an extreme here, and let's just say you're using a 70mm lens for your HDR Panorama. The light red sections show your camera positions, and the darker red show your overlap between images. This is just a rough field of view of a 70mm lens, so it's just a rough guide. As you can see, I would have to take a lot of images. I would have to do 12 rotations at 7 different tilt angles. And let's just say we're only going to do 8 bracketed exposures for this. That's 672 images that we'd have to take. That would take a very long time to process, let alone just to take the pictures. But the benefit of this is that you will get an amazingly detailed HDR panorama. And some people who create panoramas do it this way, and they create amazing panoramas. But as we're in VFX, time is very valuable, and having a wider lens will save you time. So here we have an 8mm lens. This is my Sigma lens, which has a field of view of approximately 180 degrees, which is huge. This means we can take a lot less images to get our HDR panorama. With this lens, I only need 3 rotations at 2 different tilt angles. And at 8 brackets, this will be 48 images, which is a lot less than 672. In both of these examples, I've left out the zenith and the nadir angles. I mostly see these as an added bonus for shots, and only really need them if you want to create panoramas for mainly aesthetic use, such as probably painting out the tripods and making seamless, perfect panoramas. But for VFX, I shouldn't worry too much about that. We can roughly paint out the tripod and you'll never notice if it's bad or not. Now moving on to my shoot process that I use to create HDRIs. This isn't a definitive way to shoot a HDRI, but for me it's the quickest and works really well every time. So you can see in the top left that I have these diagrams. These show what rotation angles and tilt angles that I use on my Nodal Ninja. So I'll place my Macbeth chart somewhere on the floor, or I'll usually clip it to the tripod as it stops it from blowing away. But for this I seem to have misplaced it for the moment, so I've just placed it on the floor. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our tripod is level. We can check the spirit levels on the side, check the bubbles in the middle, and we'll check all around and make sure that it's all level and that our nodal point is going to be staying center above our rotations. So I'll set my first shot at 0 degrees at a plus 30 degree angle. Then I'll move on to the next direction, 120 degrees, then 240 degrees. And this has now collected all our sky and mid-level areas. Now I'll adjust my Ninja to minus 30 degree angle and set it to a 60 degree angle. I'll take my shots, then I'll move to 180 degrees, then after I've done that I'll move to 300 degrees. So now we have captured our entire environment. And as a bonus, you can do the nadir and zenith angles if you want to create a perfectly painted out tripod, but like I say, it's just a They're just bonus shots and we can paint it out a little bit later and you'll never notice. So now we've done our shoot, we can now process our images. There are loads of panorama stitching softwares out there, free and paid for, and they are all really good. You can use anyone you like to follow through with me, but I've been using PTGUI for such a long time, I've just never changed. It's always worked for me, so PTGUI is opened. Our UI is fairly basic, but if we look up here at the top left, we have a project assistant. And if we look at this, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's quite a simple piece of software to use, and you can't really go too wrong with it. So what we'll do first, go up to here and load our images. So you can go to the images that you've got from the data package, and go to HDRI images, and you should have something like this. And we can see that we've got all our bracket exposures. If we scroll down, because we've got all the angles, and at the bottom you've only got the nadir, because the sky was so blue and clear. There's absolutely no point because it's gonna work out fine. So I'm going to select all my images. I'll select open. Now because they are CR2s, which are raw files, they might take a bit of a while to load in, but do be patient. And when they start loading in, we can go up to our crop tab and we can do our first the first thing that we can do. So if we go, these are loaded in, so we'll go to crop. So now we can see all our images brought in, and we'll just go to like 6. You don't have to go to that one, you can go to anyone. I'm just going to a more exposed one so I can see the edge of my lens. So I just want to select this and just reduce it in. I'm going to bring this crop in so we're not seeing any of the lens. And you can see there now we've just got a little space between the edge of the lens and the bit that we're going to use. And this is now translated over every single shot. So if we scroll through, we can see now all our images are in. And we don't need to go anywhere else. You can go to mask. You don't need to go to mask, because if you start masking now, you're going to have to mask it for every single one, and that's a waste of time. What we want to do first, we want to align our images first, so we can get the program to understand these are bracketed images. So if we select align images, you should get this box. And if you get this box, this means that you're going to have a good time. If you don't get this box, that means that you may have broken the sequence of these images. So when you're transferring these images to, say, your computer, it's really important not to break the sequence of these images. So basically, just as soon as you're taking them, just copy them off your SD card and put them into a file. Don't play around with them, just leave them as they are, because if you break the sequence, you won't get this window, and it will ask you to make control points, which is basically plotting points on every single image so they align, and we don't want that. We want this window, because this means a good time. So now this is opened, we'll select enable HDR, and it will link the bracketed images. So we want them linked, because then when we do our masks, it will transfer across all our linked images. Then we'll do our HDR method to true HDR. Then we'll select OK. And we'll start analysing images and going through bracketing them all together. This may take a while, so I might fast forward through this. Cool, so that's done now. So you should have a window like this opening. And you can see it's sort of roughly made our panorama. Don't worry if it looks gross. This is just a preview. This is not what our panorama looks like. This is not what it's going to look like, basically. This is just a rough preview. And we can see we've got some of our tripod in here. And it's mostly so we can sort of get the alignment and horizon correct. So one of the things that I'd always do, and it's maybe not so important, but it does make someone's lives easier, so I'd class that as quite important. And if you can do it, you should do it. So if we go over to our left here, we can look where our sun is, and we can sort of see that our sun is lingering over this side of the image, over this white building, not quite as far as the shed. So we can sort of guesstimate our sun is about here. And what we want to do, we want to bring our sun to the center of the panorama. So we can just click and drag. And although we can't see it, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, we just don't want it on the edges. So if we just pull it and we sort of guesstimate where it could be, I'm thinking it could be just around here. And what you can do, you can just select this button here and it will straighten it just in case you've pulled it up a little bit. And the reason for placing the sun in the center is that because a lot of CG people would prefer to paint out the sun and put in a 3D light for the sun casting shadows. And it's quite a used method of lighting with HDRIs. So doing it, aligning your HDRI like this, means that it's super easy to paint out the sun. It's not on the edge. You don't have to paint out something here on the right, then on the left. You can just paint out the center bit. Then it's only a 5-minute job at most, but it saves someone time not having to paint it over here and paint it over here. So I'll always make sure my sun is as center as possible, because it just makes someone's life easier. So we're pretty much done with that. So we can just get rid of that. So done our crop, and we can go over to our mask. If we just go through our images, we can see we don't actually need to mask anything on here. If we go through, and we probably won't need to mask anything until we start going into the minus direction, where we start seeing our tripod. So I'm just going to go to my most brightest, because then it's just easier to see. And you can see everything here. You can see the tripod, and you can see my clunky feet. So I'm just going to leave it on the red, and basically the red hides it from the panorama. So I'm just going to crudely paint it out. You can do it a little bit more detailed, but I'm just going to roughly paint it out. Because anything that you mask out is going to be black in the HDRI anyway, and anything that's true black in the HDRI emits no light or colour or anything. It's basically a dead patch, so it doesn't really make much difference. Well, it does. It just means that there's no tripod colours being pushed out. And we'll just get rid of my feet as well. Why not? And because we did the alignment first, this now translates across every single image. So you don't have to make masks for each one. So we'll now go to our next one. Just 59. And we'll just paint that out. You can be a little bit tighter, but I'm not too fussed, because we're probably going to be ending up painting, because this is going to come out black in HDRI, and we're probably just going to roughly paint out the bits anyway. And as you can see, placing your Macbeth chart is actually quite important to double check where you've placed it, because I've not placed it in a particularly great spot, because my tripod is covering half of it. So yeah, that was not so great. But for this shot, don't worry, because we're going to be doing a manual grade on it anyway. So if that was a little bit clearer, we'd probably use that, but it'll be fine. So now we go to our next shot. We'll just mask out our Nodal Ninja. Just get the tripod legs. Like I say, you can be like the tighter you are of this, the less you'll have to paint. But it's at the nadir of the HDRI. So in the grand scheme of things, it's probably going to be a tiny little black splotch at the bottom. So don't worry too much. There's no point wasting time on things that you might not notice. And we'll just go for our directly down. And I'll just paint that out. And don't worry about the lens, because we'll probably went a bit over then, so I'll probably go back and fix that. We can leave that corner off. So if you've gone a bit over, you can select the green, and whatever you paint green, erase. Let's do that. Green is basically what you want to keep in there, but it shouldn't matter because we've already painted what we don't want. So now if we go for all images, that's all masked out. So we're pretty much done now. We don't need to go into any of these other menus, because all those other menus will now come when we select Create Panorama. And you'll have the width, height, and you can change this. I just leave it to set as optimum size, because it just gives the max, and depending on what camera you have, it'll be way higher. I think mine's only a 24 megapixel, so but you still get a pretty big HDRI panorama from it. So you now get the LDR format, which is basically just a preview JPEG. It's literally a thumbnail basically. You would never use it apart from looking for something and you want a quick look. And you have your HDRI file format. And you can select pretty much any of these. I use OpenEXR just because it's a habit and I just use it all the time. And everyone uses EXRs basically. And we'll leave everything else as it is. And we'll go browse. And I'll save. I'll make a new folder. And I'll just call it HDRI. HDRI stitched. And I'll call this HDRI stitched. Spell. You know what? I'll just I'll put what sort of rough resolution on is it, so we know it's around about a 7. Okay, let's just leave it. And we'll just call it VO1. Click save. And now we'll create Panorama. Cool, so that's done. That's stitched. Like I said just now, if we click and drag over here, we can actually see what we've painted out on the right. And we can see that we've got all this sort of area, which is completely, it's almost an alpha here, because there's no data. And when we export that out, that should be pure black. And it won't be counted into any of your HDRI when you do your lighting. So now we're done in PTGUI. We can close it down, and our next step would be to bring it into our image editing software to have a look and paint it out. So if you guys enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.